Hi, everyone. I'm Julian Tegelius, and I'm talking to you live here from New York University. This is our regular lab meeting that we co-opted for a little public talk. I recently published a book called Artificial General Intelligence. You see it here. It is a very, it's a very popular in the sense that it's written for a wide audience. I'm not entirely sure about how popular it is. So this little talk will be a 40-minute or so overview of the topics of the book, some ruminations about artificial general intelligence, what it means, when we get it, and so on. And this is meant to be accessible for absolutely everyone. And I plan to stay online. We have a couple of other people with me in the room as well for a while after the talk for questions. So let's get going. I always think that it's a nice thing to do to introduce yourself. So who am I and where do I come from? Why am I here? I'm originally from Malmö in Sweden. That's the accent you hear. I finished high school there, even though I was terrible at maths and wanted nothing to do with mathematics or anything mathematical ever again. I wanted to study philosophy and psychology so we can understand the mind, how does intelligence work, how is it connected to consciousness, all these kind of things. As it turned out, I mean, the last place I would imagine finding myself ever would be an engineering school. As it turned out, I find myself at an engineering school. Ironies of careers and existence. I gradually drifted away from philosophy because I felt that I couldn't really make much progress here, and I was too impatient and needed to do something, needed to build stuff. So whereas my first degree was in philosophy, I then wandered off and took further degrees in evolutionary adaptive systems and finally computer science, whatever that is. I did a postdoc in Lugano in Switzerland. I was for a while a professor in Copenhagen, and now I'm one here in New York. Basically, during this transition, I realized that I wanted to do artificial intelligence. I started with robotics, but robotics was also too complicated and too slow moving. Basically, you have to care about changing batteries, the tires getting worn, cables getting winded up and stuff like this. So I didn't want to deal with this. I wanted to deal with the core about intelligence. So I discovered I could do the same kind of experiments inside video games. And then along the way, I realized that you could use AI not only to play games, but also to help design them and to try to generate them automatically. So I've been working on games for AI and AI for games for most of my career. But these questions that animated me about what intelligence really is and it connects to consciousness, they've been there. They've been with me for all this time. So moving on to the public discussion about artificial intelligence, it looks pretty much like this. We have people thinking about what this future, there are people observing this very rapid advance in artificial intelligence techniques, and they are thinking about what this might mean for the future. Is it going to replace us? Are they going to kill us all? Are they going to develop some kind of capabilities so we don't even understand what it could be, and so on. And if you follow this debate, it rapidly becomes very frustrating because people use all these terminology that you don't know what it means. It's very kind of ill-defined or not defined at all. AGI will come in 1 year or 2 years or 10 years or 100 years, or ASI, artificial superintelligence, will come at some point. And, what does this even mean? So I wrote this little book about basically what this means, trying to sort of understand it. So we can rewind and try to come up with one more sort of definable and addressable question, which is, when will we get artificial intelligence that thinks better than humans? It's a nice and clear and crisp question, isn't it? And the answer is 1956. This is what I would argue is the first time we achieved artificial superintelligence. Logic Theorist was a program by Herbert Simon and his colleague, his name I'm blanking on, that was a sort of relatively simple search process that searched in the space of mathematical theorems and Newell and Simon. And what it was doing is was trying to prove the theorems from Russell and Whitehead's Principia Mathematica, which is a monumental tome trying to ground mathematics in pure logic. And it was surprisingly good at this. They found that what is now seen as best first search in the space of a domain-specific language, which is what you see here, they could prove a large proportion of these theorems, and it was proving these theorems way faster than a human would. Ergo, we had artificial superintelligence. We had a program that could think much better and faster than human, doing something which is unabashedly intellectual. Like proving mathematical theorems is about as intellectual it gets, isn't it? And this was a start. This is one of the starting points of what is now known as artificial intelligence. The other was board games. So this is John McCarthy, another early pioneer of artificial intelligence, who shown playing chess against a computer the size of a room. Computers were that size back then. Everybody wore a suit. Everything was in black and white. The idea among early AI researchers was that we should focus on tasks that definitely were about intelligence and try to solve them. And that also were represented in such a way that computers at the time could even represent the solutions. So there was a lot of work on playing chess as the kind of epitome of intelligence. Like for centuries, smart people have been depicted as playing chess, and it's been sort of a stand-in for intellectual debate, stand-in for physical conflict, and so on. And the idea was that if we could come up with a computer that could play chess better than human, then we would have solved artificial intelligence. And we did in 1997. This is Garry Kasparov losing against IBM's Deep Blue computer. So we had another example, and there had been many different examples in the intervening time of like a computer doing better than the best human at something that is definitely intellectual at its core. And then people were saying, well, maybe chess wasn't like so hard after all. Maybe we should find another board game. And then we had 2016. This is AlphaGo from DeepMind winning against Lee Sedol, and so on. I mean, I could keep quoting examples here, but the thing is, like, the history of artificial intelligence is a long history of people coming up with problems that seem very, very challenging, and then AI researchers going away working on it for a week or 10 years or more than that, and then basically coming back with some type of software that solves this task better than human. And this means that we've been AI researchers and AI theorists have been accused of goalpost moving, what's called the moving goalpost problem. The idea is that you set up a goalpost, and this is what you need to achieve, and then you will have achieved artificial intelligence, and then when you reach it, you'll move it. This is an actual moving goalpost. I thought it was funny because I've been using the term for a long time without actually visualizing what a goalpost looks like. I tend to think that the moving goalpost problem is not a problem. It's a good thing. I don't think there is a goal. I don't think there is a final point we will reach and claim that we have solved it all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to trying to define what we're actually talking about. Because it didn't go so well, we were just like in a naively way launched into like what is when we will get AI. So let's think about general intelligence, which is the ability to do not one thing, but many different things. What is this really? Because in AGI, artificial general intelligence. The idea is that we create software, or software and hardware that will have general intelligence, and we will keep talking about it without specifying what it is. So we can go and check with the psychologists that study humans. We can check with the ethologists that study animal behavior, and of course with computer scientists that study computers. And make up like theories about why computers do what they do and how to make them do things. In psychology, there is a lot of theories, and psychologists are infamous for not necessarily agreeing with each other. They have different schools of psychology that are sometimes bitterly opposed to each other. However, the dominant theory here is what's called Cattle-Horn-Carroll theory, which basically divides up the mind into a number of different facets or functions that relate to each other in complicated ways. But basically, we have sensory and perceptual systems that analyze environmental input. You have an attention system, you have central executive, cognitive performance feedback loop, and so on. It can also be visualized like this. Don't read the fine print. I'm not sure you can read the fine print, but it's basically a way of splitting up general intelligence into 10 different facets, and each facet can be split up into a number of specific capacities, and these capacities can eventually be tested with various test games. And then you run these numbers and you do a factor analysis on this, and where you see what is the number that would explain all these different things, and you come up with a concept called G, which is short for general intelligence. And this is essentially a factor analysis of how all these different skills and performance and abilities co-vary. And if you ask a psychologist what general intelligence is, chances is that it will point to this G. G, by the way, has a very high correlation with IQ, which in itself has correlation with a lot of things, like being good at a lot of different jobs and not dying in a war, fascinating things like this. My take on this is that this is putting the cart before the horse, because you are trying to define this concept in terms of what you're measuring, but then you haven't really come up with a good sort of central principle of what you're measuring. Importantly, if you measure different capacities, you will get a different definition of G. G would vary. If you, as we've seen throughout the development of psychological theory, people have kept adding new capacities, which are claimed to be part of general intelligence, and there's debate about whether others should be included, and so on. Which means that, in my mind, G here is a fairly kind of arbitrary construct. It is also, which we're going to get back to, it's also like very, very human specific. This is basically all dependent on humans and what our culture right now thinks that humans are good at. And interestingly, it's not the only theory in town. It is the theory with best experimental evidence. But there is, to take one example of other theories, is Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, and where he splits it up into musical, bodily, kinesthetic, interpersonal, verbal, linguistic, and other types of intelligence. Gardner's theory is generally not very well received among academic psychologists, but interestingly, it is a coherent theory, and it doesn't even assert that these different capabilities are correlated. It doesn't even try to claim that there is one number that corresponds to all of this, but that explains like large parts of all this. He basically goes ahead and said, like, no, your logic intelligence is probably says nothing about your musical intelligence and nothing about your self-knowledge, for example. These are entirely different things. They may even be anti-correlated for all he cares. And then there's a multiple other theories. And I'm not saying that this is right and the other is wrong. I'm saying is that there is like a certain amount of like somewhat arbitrary decision you have to make about what to incorporate and what not to incorporate. So let's move on. Let's move on to computer scientists. There's been a number of ideas from within computer science sort of measure general intelligence as a performance of all possible problems. Now, initially, this seems like a very, very good idea. Let's think about like how good are you about everything, and maybe this is very hard to measure because there's an infinite number of different problems you can measure. But if you sample it in some way, you might get a good estimate of good you are. But this runs into the North-Wieland's theorem. North-Wieland's theorems are a set of theorems that might seem very surprising at first, but in hindsight, they're almost blindingly obvious. What the North-Wieland's theorem says in this context is that for any set of problems that is, no, but a set of all problems that can be completed in a given time, all possible policies are equally good. So all possible agents are equally good, including the policy of taking random actions. This might seem extremely bewildering first, like this cannot possibly be true. But if you think about it this way, for any problem you can define the anti-problem where the solution is the exact opposite. Or like the response to any particular policy is the exact opposite. Meaning that the problem that is meaning that an agent is good in problem A would be very, very bad when it's the inverse of this problem. What this theorem says is that trying to talk about the universe of all possible problems in a meaningful way is extremely hard. It is you can easily define any number of like strange problems where like your smart policies will utterly fail. And intelligence, not only any kind of general intelligence from this perspective is impossible. But luckily, we are humans. We live in a world, we live in a civilization even, and we don't generally go out and talk about, we don't try to go solve all possible problems. There's only a very narrow subset of problems that are actually relevant to us. So there's been attempts that sort of come up with a good sort of measure of general intelligence to take this into account. In particular, there is Shane Legg and Marcus Hutter. They come up with the theory of universal intelligence. I apologize for showing an equation on my slides. I don't usually do that, but it is a good equation. I still don't like math if you want to start my talk. Here, basically, the universal intelligence of a policy is defined as the sum of its performance, so its reward, on all potential environments, weighted by the inverse Kolmogorov complexity of the environment. Kolmogorov complexity is a measure of how easily you can describe it. So low Kolmogorov complexity means that this environment can be described with just a short string, and a long Kolmogorov complexity means that it's complicated to describe. So basically, it says that you should look at an agent's performance on all problems and prioritize those that are easier to describe because they are in some sense more fundamental. It's a clever formulation. However, I do wonder whether all these different tasks are actually relevant for us at all. You know, maybe the whole setting of trying to talk about intelligence as trying to solve a set of discrete problems that give you a reward is very misguided, or at least very biasing. So take, for example, this scene here of people in a park in Paris, I believe. You may recognize it. What kind of tasks are people engaging in, and what kind of rewards are they getting? It's very clear that the dog here, who is looking for something to eat, has a relatively short time horizon task, and it has a well-defined reward if it finds something to eat. But you know, what about the people who are just staring at the lake? What task are they solving? What reward are they getting? How can you formalize that? What kind of policies would be good at it? Or, you know, if you zoom out a little bit, this is a good picture for zooming out. What are the tasks that go into living a good life? Marrying someone you love, staying healthy, trying to stay true to your morals. And what's the time horizon? What's the reward? What really? What is the and how can you formalize this in any kind of way that fits into this environment, this formalization we just talked about? I think that there is some use for these kind of formalizations in terms of summing over a set of rewards or tasks, but it is also, this kind of formalization is by its very nature limiting ourselves to seeing only a sort of a certain subset of problems. There is another point here, which is that what are we actually dealing with? I just said that, as humans living in a world, in a civilization even, we don't generally deal with all potential problems. We don't explore all potential environments. In fact, we're probably, most of us, I'm looking at me and probably people here in this room, I don't know about you following me online, pretty ill-suited to even dealing with the ancestral environments of humans. Like modern Homo sapiens are supposed to have evolved something like 300,000 years ago on the somewhere in East Africa, and many of us would be totally unsuited to the existence and the kind of like task we would have to sort of survive there. Instead, we live in this world. We see behind and we see in front of you, full of things we have created. We have door handles, we can open doors. We have buttons we can start a microwave. We have Google and Claude and Gemini and whatever to work as in external knowledge bases. We have cars that make us extremely powerful. It makes us feel like we can run at 100 kilometers per hour. We can, but basically, all of these things give us a sense of power, because we kind of uniquely, of all the sort of living beings we know of, created this world full of things that amplify our intelligence. And sometimes when I go out and try to use all the things that exist in the world, like the subway, I tend to feel like, this kind of general intelligence thing is kind of an illusion. We feel like we're general intelligence because we keep living in a world full of things that are meant for us to interface with. It's an amazing API we built, basically, for our own brains. Right. What about these other species that haven't been lucky or unlucky enough to sort of reshape the world so completely in their favor or in their image? What we're seeing, even with other mammals, but certainly with all kinds of other animals and plants, is that they live in very specific ecological niches, where they have very specific affordances and all deal with a very kind of, from our perspective, narrow range of tasks and problems. One way of understanding this as the ecology in the natural world is really this complex web or supply chain of agents supplying services to each other. This sounds very corporate, but this is like a viewpoint many people take in ecology. Basically, you look at it as ecosystem services. Here's like green plants that produce certain nutrients for primary consumers, herbivores that produce meat for secondary consumers, carnivores, and that produce a sort of feces and they die and decay, and that produces like energy for decomposers and so on. And all of these live in different worlds. Sartre said that in one of his plays that hell is other people, which is a very particular viewpoint, is only true sometimes. But the environment is really other agents. And general intelligence sort of takes on a completely different meaning here. None of these agents in this very complex food world is generally intelligent. And in fact, what would it even mean to be general intelligent? What would it mean to be able to do all the tasks that all these different ecosystem participants would do? Why would anyone want to do that? It's not their role. It's not their niche. And I believe that basically applies to us as well. Right, so we asked what general intelligence is, and we went and asked the psychologists, the computer science scientists, and the ethologists, and we did not come away with an answer. At least in my opinion, there is no such answer. The closer you start studying this problem of general intelligence, the more it is obvious that there is no such thing. Not in a general sense, at least. So let's undeterred move on and talk about like artificial intelligence as it exists and how we could move forward. What kind of methods would actually take us to somewhat more general intelligence? We give up the idea of like general intelligence as a whole, but like try to make artificial intelligence more general. And I think there's essentially two broad paths that I see ahead of us right now. One that everybody is talking about and dealing with all day, which is self-supervised learning and foundation models, and another which is getting a lot less mind share, but probably should be getting more, which is open-ended learning. In particular, open-ended learning in artificial synthetic environments. So self-supervised learning and foundation models. Foundation models are like large models, typically large neural networks, that have been trained on a very, very huge amount of data and have acquired to some extent general capabilities, which you can then make do things in various ways by prompting them, by fine-tuning them, by adding on new neural networks on top of them, and so on. And they come in different shapes. There are those for image generation, for example, diffusion models, which are ubiquitous, where they have been trained on a very large amount of images. These images have been noised, so you've been gradually adding noise to them until there's just noise left, but so that you keep the whole kind of trajectory of noising, and you can then later denoising them. And you teach these models to create images from noise in response, typically, to some sort of textual description of what the image should be. These models have gotten amazingly good in the last 5 years or so. And can be used all over. Unlike what some people think about them, they don't store their training data. They learn the general task of recreating something that looks approximately like the training data from this. The other type of self-supervised model that is in everybody's lips is, of course, large language models, based on transformers. Here, what happens is that you train them on, instead of large amounts of images, you train them on large amounts of text. And I always say large amounts of text, I mean like the whole internet, more or less. And you train them to predict the next word. Technically, the next token, but the next word. The very large language models is funny because they have a long history. The first person, as far as we know, to attempt something like a modern language model was Claude Shannon, a genius scientist working at Bell Labs at the time, who later at MIT, who looked at the frequency of words in the English language on their own, and then basically looked at the frequency of words in response to previous words. He didn't have the computational capacity to investigate all of the English language. I think he started with one book, but basically, and then he could come up with kind of a proto-language model that was essentially just a large table of like conditional probabilities of words based on previous words. We have lately become, we as like our civilization, researchers working here, have become very, very good at scaling up very, very large neural networks trained on trillions of words. And these next token predictors can do amazing things. You can, for example, train them to reason. You can give them traces of reasoning, and then basically and then you can ask them questions. So here is me asking a version of the R1 model that I was running on my laptop the other day. how many penguins are there in Brooklyn? And it has learned patterns that are pretty useful. I mean, you read through this, it's basically, I'm trying to figure out how many penguins there are in Brooklyn. That seems odd because I know penguins typically live in colder climates, etc. And sort of reasons about zoos and so on. It has this very large knowledge base. I think it came up with 30 to 50 penguins in Brooklyn. I don't know whether that's true. I kind of want to know now, but I don't know if anyone knows. They can do a lot of other things. Sam Altman the other week posted, the founder of OpenAI, posted a short story written by a version of one of the GPT models, a metafictional literary short story about AI and grief. I read it. It is technically impressive. I wouldn't say I like it, but I also cannot tell how much my lack of appreciation for this short story was because I knew it was written by a language model, not by a human. This is funny as an aside. I used to be very strongly against concept of authenticity in art, and I used to be very strongly on the side of the death of the author. It doesn't matter who made something. It's the art piece itself. Recent progress in both diffusion models and large language models have kind of moved me a little bit towards the other side. I care more about the authorship now than I used to do, which is funny. I think the same is true for others. But anyway, you can get these models to do amazing stuff. The question is then, when imitating human culture and output, which is what we're doing, basically learning to imitate what humans do, training on the exhaust of human culture, will it ever get us to general intelligence? And what kind of general intelligence? And I think the latter is the more relevant question, because there are some ways in which you can see there's no limit to this scaling up. Like, you can just keep training on more and more data, keep training larger and larger models, and they can do more and more things. But what kind of things can we do? Because none of these words that they're trained on is actually ever connected to the real world. These models are very, very good at talking about the color blue, but they've never seen the color blue. They're very good at talking about grief, but it's very hard to imagine a way in which a language model experiences grief. They are like extreme imposters, right? Which is not to say that they're not useful. They're very, very useful, and they're going to keep coming up with good stuff. But another question, which is very strongly connected to the fact that there is no grounding for the symbols they have. Basically, the words don't mean anything or don't mean the same thing as they do for humans, is to what extent they can be truly novel. The other path that I think should be receiving more attention than it is open-ended learning, where the idea is, unlike in reinforcement learning, where you have a bunch of environments and you're trying to learn to perform well in these environments or solve these tasks well, or in training a language model where your task is very well defined, you're just predicting the next few words. Here, you're having the algorithms define their own environments and define their own rewards. So basically, you can talk about this as automating the moving of the goalposts. The reward is setting, the model is kind of like creating its own rewards and trying to follow those. One way of talking about one way of seeing why you want to do this is because you're simply exhausting the tasks we are being able to create. We've seen recently that benchmarks for large language models are getting satisfied increasingly fast, or exhausted increasingly fast. And for people who've been working on game playing for a long time, it's very clear that you can sort of train a model that plays a particular game very well, but doesn't really create much intelligence that can be transferred onto other tasks. So one way I phrase it sometimes after looking at all these grid world games we're playing is like, what would you do in a grid? How would you get beyond the confines of this simple environment? Well, you need to sort of innovate by changing the environment, changing the task, right? And there is a small stream of research in this where people come up with algorithms that create, for example, in the top left example here, create these levels for this walker in real time in response to what the algorithm creates. We have also been working on a number of methods to create game levels or variations of game rules in response to what the policies can, what the agents we have developed can already solve. So that basically now we have trained an agent to solve these levels, now come up with a new level that they can solve, but that we can think they might be able to learn to solve somehow, which is pretty tricky. Like, how do you measure this? And how do you measure novelty here? You want it to be sufficiently novel. You want it to look novel. You want to have a novel kind of performance profile on these existing agents. So part of what we're doing in this lab is coming up with ways in which we can generate novel problems and connecting these with learning algorithms. Eventually, you'll have to go to very large, persistent varied environments. Joseph Suarez was working for a number of years on something called neural MMO, which is a very complex environment with agents that move around in a procedurally generated 3D world. But then there are like all of these pales in comparison to real multiplayer online games, such as EVE Online, which are enormous and have huge amounts of variation and huge amounts of complicated challenges in there as well. And many of them posed by the other players in the game. And remember, as I said before, the environment is other agents. So we can think about open-ended learning and ask the same question. Would it be able to give rise to artificial general intelligence, whatever general means? And would it be the same kind of general intelligence as we would get from self-supervised learning in foundation models? I think this is an interestingly different path because we're going to get different kinds of intelligence, different kinds of behavior coming out, which in its own way sort of refutes the idea of artificial general intelligence. How can there be artificial general intelligence if we have different general intelligence that actually look and behave differently? Then none of them is general. But this is a little bit the same question as about trying to look at this picture we saw before of the ecosystem and look at and ask who's more intelligent: the lion, the zebra, the maggot, the anthill, the oak. Well, it doesn't really have an answer because they solve different problems and live in different ecological niches. And I am more excited about the future of AI, where we're basically dealing with different kind of ecological niches. When it comes to open-ended learning, I'm particularly excited about where self-supervised learning we become very good at like imitating the kind of intelligence we already have and doing the kind of task we already know what to do, but even better. That's what language models are moving towards. But whereas open-ended learning, we're trying to come up with ways of solving tasks we're not solving currently that we may never even have thought about, like the final frontier in a sense. So I want to finish with a quote from Alan Turing, who is one of the forefathers of computer science. He wrote a paper in 1950 called On Computing Machinery and Intelligence. It's an extremely good paper. He proposes the Turing test, the famous Turing test, among other things there, but it has so many things in there. Everybody should read it. It's very easy to read. But what he says here towards the end is that the original question, can machines think, I believe to be too meaningless to deserve discussion. Nevertheless, I believe that at the end of the century, the use of words and general educated opinion will have altered so much that one will be able to speak of machines thinking without expecting to be contradicted. And I think that this is I agree basically. the original question, can machines think, I believe to be kind of meaningless. And we tend to talk of them as thinking when it is a practical way of thinking about what they do. And I think the same is true for artificial general intelligence. The questions about what, when will we reach artificial general intelligence? What does, how will we get to AGI? I believe that they are too meaningless to deserve discussion. And in fact, a lot of people who talk very loudly about when AGI will arrive and whether or not it will, should probably just stop talking about this. They're not helping the debate forward, including people who head up famous and well-funded labs. Right, last slides, a bit of self-promotion. I write books sometimes. There is this artificial general intelligence book that if you like this talk, you may want to read this book. And I have a previous book about AI and games called Playing Smart, and two textbooks that are also freely available on these web addresses you see here. The second edition of our artificial intelligence and games book will be out very soon, hopefully next month. And if you're interested in AI and games in particular, we're running a summer school in Malmö, Sweden, my hometown. This is actually the street I grew up on, June this year. Thank you for coming, and I stay around if there are any questions. And I see there's a couple of questions from chat. Micha, right? Can we unmute it?
Sure. Just give me a second.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, we're navigating Zoom here. So I'm just going to answer Michal's second comment about Max Bennett's book about evolution of intelligence. Yes, that book is really, really great. There's a book by a guy called Max Bennett called, if I'm not wrong, A Brief History of Intelligence, which is just that. It's a history of evolution and it tying into various advances in artificial intelligence. It's really great. I knew a bunch of things in there, but there's a bunch of things I did not know. In particular, the very interesting connections between early reinforcement learning in research and neuroscience, and the kind of two-way influence between them is very, very good. So I'd recommend that book to everybody, A Brief History of Intelligence by Max Bennett. If you have to choose between reading my book and that book, read that book. It's better. Max did not pay me for this. Max, if you see this, you can feel free to pay me. Michal, you have another point.
Yeah, maybe one question. What is your opinion on this definition of intelligence from Francois Cholet? You know, like that the intelligence is the ability to learn new skills and tasks.
Yes, I think it's good. Cholet was here a couple of months ago, and we had a good discussion about that. I really like his ARC or ARC challenge. It's really interesting, and I think that learning new, I mean, what I said before, like learning new skills is kind of meant to be subsumed into this, but it also like highlights one of the problems with this kind of definitions of intelligence as ability to solve different tasks. Many tasks would require you to learn to solve new tasks as you go along. I think that it is true. He makes a very good point. I also like his ARC challenge, but it's also limited to a particular kind of intelligence. I think that you could have come up with a model that solves the ARC challenge, but which is still unable to do a lot of things that humans routinely do, in particular things that require reasoning on a long time scale, so reasoning on a large amount of information and so on. But yeah, I appreciate his perspectives on it.
Thanks.
And also you had a comment about Friston's active inference theory. My comment about active Friston's inference theory is that I don't understand it. And I have tried, but I don't know if anyone would like to sort of. Yeah, so yeah, go on.
No, I completely agree. It's kind of hard, but he actually wrote not a bad book about it, which when I read that, then I had glimpses of understanding. I can't say that I understand it either, but it sounds nice. And the predictive coding part, I completely believe in. Like that we are making models.
Yeah, there's definitely something there. I mean, I believe that there's a lot to like the ability of to sort of learn predictive coding, and that predicts a lot of things. More skeptical does everything. People have this habit of like coming up with one good idea and then saying that this explains everything, and I rarely find that believable. Hey,
There are no penguins in Brooklyn.
there are no penguins in
It
Brooklyn?
looks like no. There's some in the Central Park Zoo. That's
Oh man,
the
there's
best
no.
you're gonna get.
Oh wow.
Tim's
Yeah.
looking really suspicious.
Yeah.
You
I
understand?
didn't know I was to see him in Central Park.
What's that?
No,
didn't know
I,
it was in
it's true.
Central
I have seen penguins in Central Park. I went to Central Park. We took the family there, and there were penguins in the Central Park, in the zoo in Central Park.
And Bronx for sure.
I believe everything exists in parks, but
Every animal.
every animal exists in parks. I did not know that there were no penguins in Brooklyn, and I'm slightly disappointed. I hope someone has like a weird illegal nightclub with penguins or something like this. But, yeah,
Beach.
yeah. You see, guys, this is the kind of comments I get from Alan. Very, very useful. Cedric, hey, which Cedric is this? No?
It's the French Cedric that you met in Lugano in Switzerland.
Really? That's a long time. Good.
Yeah, very long time indeed.
See you.
I'm sorry I missed your talk because I only saw the announcement on LinkedIn just 2 minutes ago, so I just joined in now. But it's really funny because I've been reading your book all afternoon by the swimming pool since I'm on holiday in the Canary Islands.
Nice. Yeah. Do you have any? I hope you like it, or if you don't like it, that you have some interesting insights about why it's bad.
Well, I just finished chapter 5, so I can't really comment on the rest yet. But yeah, it's been very enjoyable to read. Most of, I mean, there is new information for me, but not, I mean, it's things that I'm familiar with. But it's very, your thoughts are very well organized. So that's great to kind of clarify things in my head. It's been helpful to read it. And yeah, I look forward to the rest of the book, really. And hopefully I'll have finished it by the end of my holidays, and I'll recontact you then.
I wrote it to me for reading, and as my policy has been to try to keep my thoughts organized and my environment around me absolutely unorganized and chaotic. But yes, so good.
Yeah, we'll do. Get back in touch once I've finished the book. Nice to chat with you again.
Great. We've arrived at the end of time, or at right at the end of the lab meeting. So thank you everybody for showing up. And have a great day.